Good evening, as we say across the pond.
Very good.
All right, so we begin Perek Chamishi, hilchos beis habechira, Perek Hey Halacha Aleph, Har Habayis, V'hu Har Hamiria, the Temple Mount, Chomish Meis Amo, Chomish Meis Amo was 500 Amos squared. This is going to change to 3,000 Amos squared. If you look inside the Novin Yecheskel, the Mefarshim explained based on the Psukim that the Har will should expand, it will grow. And we know that when the Romans came to Yerushalayim, they leveled the Har Habayis. They chiseled down the Har Habayis. So when Mashiach will come, the original Har Habayis will be rebuilt.
That's width. You talked about width there, but also height to be rebuilt. In other words.
Right. So the area from where it begins to ascend is the base is 500 by 500.
Right, but you're saying now it'll be 3,000 by
Yeah.
3,000 by 3,000.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And it'll also be as high as it used to
It
be.
will be a bit taller. Yeah.
Okay.
High as it used to be. So this Har Habayis was surrounded with a wall. Underneath the Har Habayis, there was a system of arches. Arches. Why were these arches placed underneath the Har Habayis? So that if there was something that was impure, ritually impure, underneath the Har Habayis, in order not to create an issue of oil tumah, we know that something covers over something that is tummy could contract tumah, sometimes transfer it to the levels on top. We would have these arches next to each other, and then an arch on top of those where it joined, so it wouldn't allow the tumah to wiggle through. And the area of the walled area of the Har Habayis, there was like a balcony extending from the wall. So if you were standing right next to the wall of the Har Habayis, there would be a slight roof over you, covering you. There's a beis is a nice of the Rebbe, but we see that the Har Habayis, it was a mountain. On top of the Har Habayis was the Beis Hamikdash, to teach us that the focal point of our day and our lives, like what is most important for us, what is at the spitz of everything, should be the kedusha and the ruchnis of everything.
But I think the keeping were not under the mizbeach. Is that correct?
We were keeping all under the Har Habayis. So that would include.
That's my impression. That it wasn't, because then it wouldn't be on karka.
So the mizbeach was built on the ground, but underneath the ground, they would have these domes.
Okay.
The Har Habayis had 5 gates. Echem in the Ma'ariv, Echem in the Mizrach, Echem in the Tzafon, U'shnayim in the Darim. One from the west, one from the north, one to the east, 2 to the south. Reichav kol shar eser amis, v'gavi esrim yesh lahin dalasis. These entrances were 10 wide by 20 in height, and they had doors. So now we ascend. We go up the Har Habayis. We come close to the actual structure of the Beis Hamikdash. There's a seirik, a lattice wooden fence, that is high 10 tefachim. Beyond that lattice fence, we have the chel. It extends for 10 amos. The chel, meaning the area that proceeded to the actual wall of the Ezras Nashim and the Azara, and the wall of the Beis Hamikdash itself, wept during the time of the Churban. The chel is the area that proceeded, that one would walk through to reach the Ezras Nashim and the areas around the Kodesh. Beyond the chel, we have the Azara. It was 187 by 135. The Shiva Shorim Hoyula, another place that Rambam says it had 5 gates, over here writes it has 7. So the area of the Azara, not of the Ezras Nashim, were working from left to right. So the area of the Azara, it had 7 gates. Shloshim Netzafim Smuchim L'Ma'ariv, 3 on the northern side that were more to the left of the actual structure of the Beis Hamikdash. Shloshim Nedarim Smuchim L'Ma'ariv, and correspondingly on the southern side, there were 3 entrances, but more to the left of the one who was looking from south to north. Then we have the Shar Nikner that was placed right in the middle of the eastern wall. Going along with the measurements of the entrances of the Har Habayis, these entrances as well were 10 in width and 20 in height. They had doors that were coated in gold. Chutz Misham Mizrachi, showing a choishes deim lazav, with the exception of the eastern gate that was copper. It resembled the sparkle of gold. The Azar itself wasn't in the middle of the Har HaBayis. The Har HaBayis was 500 by 500. It wasn't right in the middle over there. It was most distant from the south, so meaning it was more northernly. But it was also more westernly. So it was most northernly, a little more westernly. There was, if you were to measure the space between the top of the Azara going all the way to the north wall and the side of the Azara going to the west wall, from the top going to the north wall, there was more space than the side of the Azara that was going west. And there was more space from east to the eastern wall of the Har HaBayis than there was space from the northern wall of the Azara to the northern wall of the Har HaBayis. So to be masak in this halacha, the Rambam is telling us, so if we are to measure the distance between the Azara and the walls of the Har HaBayis, going from largest distance to smallest distance, it's the southern wall of the Har HaBayis to the southern wall of the Azara was the largest distance. Then we had from the the northern wall of the Har HaBayis of the Azara to the northern wall of the Har HaBayis was second in place. Excuse me, it was the eastern wall to the eastern wall of the Har HaBayis, from the northern wall of the Azara to the northern wall of the Har HaBayis, and the least space was from the western wall of the Azara to the western wall of the Har HaBayis. So we have a picture over here. This image places it quite well. So in terms of space, it's kind of counterclockwise. More space at the bottom, less space in the east, less space in the north, and the least space on the left. Right. Zayin lefnei ha'azarim, front of the Azar b'mizrei chaysa esas nashim. There was an esas nashim. He hoysa eirech me'av shleishim v'chamesh al reichav me'av shleishim v'chamesh. It was 135 squared. Unlike the Azar, where the actual structure of the Beis Hamikdash was, this was a perfect square. It contained 4 rooms in its 4 corners. Each were 40 amas squared. They weren't roofed. And this is how it's going to be structured also in the times of Mashiach. They're going to be, the location of these rooms are going to be slightly different. They're not going to be inside the wall of the Ezes Nashim. There's a sefer that I was going through recently. It goes through into detail how these rooms are going to look like. Mashiach would come in, but them being unroofed is taka going to continue even when Mashiach comes. They still won't have that roof. What are the purpose? What is the function of these rooms? Southeast, which means the room that would be on the left of the person entering the Ezes Nashim, right and left, that room would function Lishkas HaNazirim, the Lishka of the Nazarites. In that room they cook the shlomim, and they would shave their hair. They would put the hair under the pots. The northeastern, meaning the room on the right of the person who's entering the Ezes Nashim, would be Lishkas Dir HaEitzim, the Lishka that would house the wood. Shosham Kehanim Baili Mumin Matlin BaEitzim. The Kehanim who had a mum and couldn't do an actual Aveda in the service of the Karbanos, so they would be in that room and they would deworm any logs of wood to make sure that it could be fit for the Mizbeach. And if it was a wooden worm, it was damp, it was moist, it was wormy, it would be disqualified for the Mizbeach. The Gemara in Shkan, Mishnah Shkan tells us there was a kohen who was in the Lishkas Dir HaEitzim, and there was a tile on the floor that was slightly dislodged, and he took a hammer to put it back in place, and when he gave Azetz, like a light came out, and he immediately passed away. That's an Ishmaseh.
Passed away.
Yeah. So the Chachamim said underneath that tile is where the Aron HaKodesh is. So we have a bit of an idea of where the Aron HaKodesh is. Fine. Tzveinis Maravis, the northwestern, meaning it would be the room on the right from the vantage point of the person entering the Ezes Nashim, and he would walk further down into the Ezes Nashim. Lishkas HaMetzeiroim, it was Lishka for the Metzeiroim. the lishka for the Mitzrayim. Marav Zeroimes and the southern west of Lishka, Ba Hoyunisan Yain Vashemen. That would house the wine and the oil. He Hoysin Nikas Lishkas Beis Shmanya was called Lishkas Beis Shmanya on account of the oil that was housed in that room. The Lishka of the Mitzrayim, the purpose of that Lishka is that there was a mikveh in there for the Mitzrayim who need to go to mikveh before the Karbanis. That is the room that they would use for that mikveh. As Asnashim Hoysim Mukafes Ketzeitzera or Gezustera. It had a balcony on the roof, meaning around the walls, so that the women can view from the top and the men from the bottom to avoid mingling. The beis gadol hoye betzad hazara. It's fein bechutz bein hazara v'hachel. There was a room that was attached to the azara, not the ezes nashim, to the azara, the actual area that surrounded the kodesh. It had a dome on that room. The interior of that room was surrounded with rafters of stone. This room was called the Lishkas Beis HaMeiket. There was a fire in there. This room that was adjacent to the azara had two entrances, one entrance and an exit. One that opened into the azara, which this room was adjacent to, and the other door opens to the chel, that area that was surrounded in with a small wooden fence that was right next to the azara. Yod says Ramam, this Lishkas Beis HaMeiket had 4 smaller rooms within this room. Two had the kedusha of the azara and 2 were chel. So how do we know which ones are kedush and which ones are chel? If a person is walking in from the north, so he's walking through chel territory. When does he begin to define when kedush territory begins? It says there were projections from the wall, wooden pieces that would stick out, which would inform the person who's walking north to south that you are now passing into kedush, or vice versa into chel territory. What was the purpose of these mini rooms within the Lishkas Beis HaMeiket? Ma'aravis, Dreimis, the southern western room, Lishkas Hatzulayim, was the Lishkas Hatzulayim, where they had at least 6 sheep that were checked, and these sheep would be used for the karbanis. The karbanis needed. Dreimis, Mizrachis, the southern eastern wall, meaning going counterclockwise. Lishkas Eisei Lechem Apani was the Lishka where they would fashion the Lechem Apani. Mizrachis Feines, the northeastern wall, Bar Gonzo Beis Chashminoi, Avnei HaMizbeach Sheshiksim Malchi Yavon, where the Chashminoim kept the stones that the Yavanim had desecrated. Tzveinis Maraves, and the northwestern Lishka, Ba Yodin Beis HaTfilah, there was a mechila underneath that would lead to a Beis HaTfilah. If a kohen saw a keri during the night, he would go down that mechila and go to the mikveh that was by the end of that mechila. Yod Aleph, Hayed Beis HaTfilah Minishka Zu, somebody who's going to the mikveh by this lishka, so he would enter this room in the bigger room to go to the mikveh. He would go in a tunnel that would travel underneath the actual building of the Beis HaMikdash. There were lights, candles that were lit on either side of the Mesiba. Until he reaches the mikveh. In the Dura Sham, where the mikveh was, there was a fire burning. The Beis HaKisei shel Kavod, and there was a Beis HaKisei of Kavod. What does this mean? What is the honor of this Beis HaKisei? Zehu Kvedi. You found the door closed. You knew that somebody was there, so you wouldn't disturb. We can infer the inverse. If it was open, there was no reason to ask if somebody's inside. Okay, fine. Making a snachta. We'll continue tomorrow. Mitzvah Hashem.